Tonight, the LLF discussion focuses on a new publication by Mr. Tariq Khosa. It is called Inconvenient Truths. It's about the governance issues of Pakistan. I have known Mr. Tariq Khosa over a long time, but I think he came into my notice when he was IG Balochistan, and he extended the municipal law to all the districts for the first time. But he's been DGFIA, and he served in the Pakistan Police Service with distinction. He comes from a very distinguished family. But so is the other discussant. She comes from a very distinguished family. She's been judge of the Lahore High Court. She's a bright lawyer, and she's done her studies at Harvard. And she has, I think, served us most effectively in the Pakistan Human Rights Commission, and she's known for her work there. Coming back to Tariq Khosa, my question is that the book is generally about the problems of governance. In your career, you have focused mainly on that. Can we simply introduce the theme? Because I feel that it's not only governance, but also going back to your service days, it was a problem of writ of the state. I mean, there were many areas in Pakistan, South Punjab and Balochistan, the tribal areas. You couldn't see the consistency of the writ of the state. What are your thoughts on the book that you've written now?
Thank you very much. At the outset, I express my gratitude to the Lahore Literary Festival, Mr. Razi Ahmed and his team, for organizing today's discussion on my second book, which is about Pakistan's governance challenges. This book was published by the Lightstone Publishers, and I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Amina Sayyed, Nadia Ghani, and their team, who not only published my first book, The Faltering State, in 2017, while they were in the Oxford University Press, but once they established this new publishing house, this book was one of the first few ones that got published and was launched earlier this year. And I am also, it's great honor for me that we have a distinguished panelist and led by, of course, Mr. Khalid Ahmed, who was my teacher in Government College Lahore. When I joined the first year, he taught us English language. Soon he left for Foreign Service of Pakistan, but returned to his original passion, which was journalism. Mr. Khalid Ahmed is our role model. He's an icon for me. I'm also, it's a great honor that the other distinguished panelist is none other than Justice Nasra Iqbal, a great jurist, a great judge of repute, and who has contributed to the cause of the disadvantaged sections of society and has have been really an icon as far as the judiciary and her family is concerned. So I'm overwhelmed with gratitude for this quality of panel. Coming to the first question, Mr. Khalid Ahmed, that you raised, the teacher asking his student as to what really motivated and what is this book all about. I think I have pondered over my 40 years of experience as a public servant or as a law enforcement officer, starting in early 70s and over 4 decades. I have pondered often the role of the state. And that's why I call this the faltering state policies, which have led us to this stage of poor governance. And I basically feel that the role of a state, and if it can be only legitimate, if it promotes shared values and it does not impose a narrative. In Pakistan, I think our greatest strength is diversity. There has to be this unity in diversity, and therefore the ethnic mix. This is a strength. Our federating units have to be strong, and the federation will be strong, and not the other way around. My second, uh, the role of the state has to, the state has to ensure the sanctity of an electoral process and the rule of law. So democracy means fair elections and not rigged ones. You have to have freedom of expression, human dignity, rights for citizens. So therefore, the issue of missing persons, and that I have addressed greatly in this book, not only from the context of Balochistan, where I have served, but I think strongly feel that people who prefer ballot over bullets are not anti-state. And above all, why I wrote this book was that a state is legitimate on account of his performance. And from that point of view, I quoted Ibn Khaldun, because a quality of a ruler is that placing the persons in their right stations. So that is what is simple governance, is right person for the right job. And that is where the Anatole Levin's book, Pakistan's the hard country, where he describes this governance paradigm of Pakistan in terms of this formula P2K, patronage to kinship. And this has been an unfortunate tragedy that I have seen over service, that whether political parties and others have consistently followed this aspect of patronage and kinship rather than merit and fair play in the context of governance paradigm. So therefore, that is what made me, based on my experiences, having come into contact with different, prime ministers, different military chiefs who have been our presidents, or chief ministers and others. So it's my interaction with people in power that has driven me to write this book, and which is primarily about rule of law, the criminal justice institutions. And that is why the bulk of this book is devoted to the aspect of issue of police reforms. That is what, Mr. Khalid Ahmed, that was the motivating factor for me to place this as a governance paradigm for future generations.
Allow me to now shift to Justice Nasra. She has also, I think, experienced a lot of the when she was a judge or when she has been a lawyer. I'm sure she has her insights about these problems of governance of Pakistan. I request her to make her views clear to us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khalid Ahmed. First of all, it's a privilege for me to appear with two icons. And whatever I have to say, I am back in my second childhood. So please prompt me if I forget. But I was asking Mr. Khosa earlier that these problems of governance that we have, where do they stem from? And the main reason which I was trying to examine was nobody knows where the buck stops. All the institutions we have, we've been talking about the police. First of all, let me refer to the police reforms that Mr. Khosa referred to in 2003. He said police reforms did take place, but they were never effectively executed. To my impression was that because maybe they were the results of the rule of a dictator and they had not been brought into place by a civilian government. I would like to ask Mr. Khosa, was that correct, or is it a wrong assumption on my part?
Well, thank you very much for raising this issue in terms of where the buck stops. The buck stops, and the government now has been clearly defined by the Constitution as the chief executive and the cabinet. Whether it is in the federation or in the provinces, it's the chief executive and cabinet who reflect the political will. So therefore, the buck stops at the chief executive. And it is this cabinet responsibility which has to be displayed in terms of superintendence, which has to be exercised over police or other jurisdictions, but in accordance with law and not arbitrary way, the way it has been exercised over a period of time. That is why you have rightly pointed out the police law of 2002, after a colonial dispensation of 1861, where the duties of police vis-a-vis citizens and disadvantaged sections of society were not very clear, where police was supposed to be, as a depoliticized institution, police to be a highly accountable institution, a professionalism which is important, and police is a community service, not a force. That was the basic idea of reforms, and while they were implemented during the period of a military dictator in 2002, the concept or the reforms were generated by a consistent movement which started in 1985. In 1985, a police committee report was constituted, which examined the whole issue. It is this effort of 25 to 26 police committees and commissions, and an effort from 1985 that culminated in a reform in a new law, which basically addressed the democratic aspirations of the people of Pakistan. So while overall there were a lot of discussions which took place with different stakeholders, this law has no aspect where the police as an institution has been given unlimited powers. No, it's a checks and balances. Police is highly accountable institution. But look at the buck stops where the institutions have to be put in place. So no chief executive in the federation or the province has put an independent police complaints authority comprising of non-political people of integrity who should oversee the complaints and excesses that the police commit. So citizens' complaints have to be addressed through these institutional means. None of the provincial governments have put in place a public safety commission at the provincial level. And so therefore, these are the bodies which are supposed to depoliticize the police. That's why I still hold different political governments and chief executives and their cabinets responsible for why these reforms were not implemented in right spirit. Therefore, while the law may have come at a time, but it was subsequently, the courts have supported this. The high courts and the Supreme Court have supported this law. If this law was only in a dispensation of a dictator, why would our courts, in even right up till Supreme Court, support this law, which is purely in the interests of the citizens of Pakistan?
Allow me to make a point here. Ordinarily, when a dictatorship takes over a country, a lot of regimentation takes place. But we find that right from the start, when the first war with India took place, right after 1947, we said the tribals went. And we know that we never regularized the tribal areas. And then we discovered that the whole of Balochistan was also not regularized. And if you go to Sindh, Karachi is our foremost country in terms of modernization. I think Karachi is more modernized than any other area. But adjacent to Karachi, if you go to interior Sindh, the police is completely dysfunctional. It means that the magistracy and the police are under the influence of powerful people who rule in interior Sindh. All this I will put first to Justice Nasra and then to Mr. Tariq Khosa.
Thank you. Mr. Tariq Khosa is actually the correct person because he has 40 years of experience with the same force that we are referring to. But I have been teaching law for 40 years. And my former students are spread across the country in civil service and different services. And when they go to remote areas of Sindh and they try to perform their responsibilities to the best of their abilities, the Vaderas or the elected so-called representatives, the MPAs, MNAs, or whoever, they come and interfere in whatever they do. And if they don't listen to them, they get them transferred. And one poor student of mine who was a brilliant young man got transferred, I think, in 1 year 4 or 5 times. And look at what we have in Punjab now. 6 IGs have gone in this 1 year. So I would like to ask Mr. Khosa, what is the um, rationality behind all this?
Yeah,
Well,
that's the question I would like also.
thank you very much. Mr. Khalid Ahmed, I think the issue of the federally or erstwhile federal administered tribal areas was a big concern in the context of militancy, in the context of Taliban's getting safe havens. Therefore, one of the greatest successes of counterterrorism national action plan, which went into force in 2015, and eventually there was a realization amongst the parliamentarians, the political governments, as well as the security establishment and the military establishment, that there has to be a mainstreaming of this no man's land or FATA. The 7 agencies now stand merged with KP province through a constitutional amendment. This is a remarkable achievement, which was, possible due to a consensus built that we need to have one system in that KP province where the writ of the judiciary and the police will extend right up till Afghan border. So therefore, while the operations were carried out starting from 2009 onwards in South Waziristan or Swat area during General Kiani's time, which were continued by General Rahil Sharif in North Waziristan later, and which have now broadened under the present military chief. So these are not individual doctrines, Kiani or Rahil Sharif or Bajwa doctrine. These are military doctrines. So there is a realization now that you have to have, these terrorists and safe havens cannot be sustained any longer. So there has been a change in policy. This is a good development. Consolidation phase is taking place where FATA has now session judges, where the regular SPs, police officers have been posted. So I see it as a positive development. The second issue which you have pointed out is about Balochistan. Yes, it remained a big cause of concern. It gave us a lot of satisfaction when all the 30 districts of Balochistan were converted into one main same police jurisdiction in 2007. But it was unfortunately reversed in 2008 and subsequently. And we have seen the consequences of these vast spaces which were provided an opportunity for, low-grade insurgency to perpetuate in that province. So therefore, there is now a realization amongst both the provincial, the federal government, that the writ of the police or judiciary and that jurisdiction has to be enhanced. 4 districts now, in addition to Quetta, Lasbela, and Nasirabad and others, have now been converted into police jurisdiction, and gradually the plan is that over next 3 years, hopefully the entire province will revert back. So this is again was a reversal, but now the thinking is to get back towards establishing the writ of the state, as you have rightly pointed out. My basic thesis has been wherever the writ of the state has been eroded, I think the militants have gained, those safe havens have been created. And that is why we see the Talibanization or other militant actors becoming active. You've also raised the question of Karachi. I think Karachi was a big challenge, and all credit to the then political dispensation and other stakeholders who started operation in Karachi in September 2013. And since then, police has been in the forefront in laying down their lives, fighting terrorists in Karachi, and also paying a huge, I think, price in terms of 70% reduction in incidents of terror over a period of 4 to 5 years. This is a creditable, I think, achievement over a period of time where Karachi law and order has been restored to a large extent. And that is the police in the front line, supported by civil armed forces, supported by the intelligence agencies and military as the last muscle. So everybody has been, I think, in a concerted drive, have been concerned. That is where we found that there are some of these achievements of the National Action Plan. However, there are certain things which have not been able to be achieved. We can talk about the Counterterrorism National Action Plan. But anyway, these are in terms of FATA, in terms of Balochistan, and in Karachi are some, progress or some steps taken in the right direction. And hopefully, in terms of militants also, and banned and proscribed organizations, our policy hopefully has shifted. It is not only in the context of FATF or that pressure, but it's a realization amongst different national stakeholders, whether they are a federal government, the provincial government, or other security establishment. They realize that the militant organizations can not be strategic assets, they can be strategic threats. So hopefully we are in that right direction.
I think after 72 years, this is a long time in which we have neglected the normalization of the state. We went into the wars without thinking what we have to do with such things as the writ of the state. And today, I think we are made to feel very intensely how much we have lost by promoting the concepts of jihad and allowing foreign jihadis to come and sit here and occupy very important places on our territory. Come to think of it, when I count all the areas which are now under threat, or where police is regularly subordinated to other factors, more than 60% of the territory is without the proper writ of the state. What do you think, Mrs. Nasra?
आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा. सूरत हाल तो ये है, बल्कि मैं सोचूंगी that more than 60% is outside the writ of the state. और पीछे हालात कुछ बेहतर हुए थे, और जब हालात बेहतर होते हैं, I am an incorrigible optimist. लेकिन अब तो कुछ अरसे से दोबारा, खास तौर पे जब ये सारा इंटीग्रेट हो गया हुआ है फाटा और ये केपीके में कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अमेंडमेंट से इंटीग्रेशन हुई है, लेकिन रिसेंटली दोबारा बलूचिस्तान में भी और केपीके में भी शुरू हो गया है टेरर का, और दूसरी अतराफ में. तो इसके लिए मैंने अभी खोसा साहब की किताब में देखा, और मैं सोचती हूँ कि इसकी तरफ तवज्जो हमें दिलानी चाहिए कि ट्रंप जैसा शख्स प्रेसिडेंट है ना, और चीफ एग्जीक्यूटिव यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स का, हर रोज सुबह खोसा साहब ने बताया 7:30 बजे उसकी सिक्योरिटी की जो टीम थी वो उसको बताती है, और अब भी बताती है कि क्या हालात है अमेरिका में और क्या हालात है दुनिया में, सो दैट ही इज फुली अवेयर. हमारे यहाँ ऐसा कुछ नहीं होता. ये तो टीवी से देखते हैं हमारे चीफ एग्जीक्यूटिव्स के हो क्या रहा है. So this lack of awareness and ensuing lack of responsibility may be one of the reasons why we suffer from this kind of a disintegrative process, even though we had improved much better about 2-3 years back. And I would like Mr. Khosa to give an opinion what he has to say.
Thank you very much. As Mr. Khalid Ahmed has pointed out, I think in the wake of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, I think from 1980, once a formal militant organization was raised in 1980 by the, a madrasa in Karachi. So that is where this Deobandi Jamia Ulum Islami Karachi, the Harkat al-Jihad Islami, Huji, was the first formal, jihadi outfit launched. And after that, we saw mushroom growth of, these militant organizations cannot operate, thrive, or perpetuate in an environment where there is some kind of a protection by state or by some agencies, whether domestic, whether covert or overt, or whether domestic or foreign. So therefore,
Mr. Khosa,
yes.
What does it do to the police? Tell us,
yes.
When the state behaves like that, what does it do to the police?
this has been the major factor, that this has resulted in militarization of internal security strategy, and the police, which is the first line of defense, which given free hand can handle these militants and can handle this terror and other situations. I'm pretty confident, having served as IG, I know the capacity or the will. If the police has the best possible intelligence network within the community, within their police stations and others. So therefore, the police, the undermining of the writ of the state, it means weakening of the police. And if the police is weakened, and if other agencies are of course, they get or take the lead, then it results in what has happened in Pakistan, which is the militarization of our internal security strategy. I'm a firm believer in an approach of strengthening criminal justice institutions, strengthening the police institution, and we see that all other institutions basically come in support role, whether they are civil armed forces like Rangers or Frontier Corps and other agencies, they come in a support role. Intelligence agencies, whether civilian or military, play a role of support in terms of internal security. And finally, military is the punch. They come in support of the civilian authority, not the other way around. So it's been happening that we, for far too long, it is due to frequent military rules or frequent martial laws, the military has been in the driving seat. And therefore, what has resulted is the civil administration and the police getting weakened and weakened. And therefore, we need the basic thrust of restoration of a writ of state is not only to strengthen the institutions, which is the police, prosecution, prisons, and the courts, the judiciary. And this is precisely an army chief talking in a meeting on National Action Plan on 21st January in 2015, where General Rahil Sharif asked the Prime Minister that you have got a cushion of 2 years where the military courts have been called in for this extraordinary situation. But you have to give more development funds to restructuring of these criminal justice institutions. You have to develop the capacity of anti-terrorism courts. You have to develop the capacity of investigators, the prosecutors, and these are the ones in an urban setting. They can defeat terrorism, which is a law enforcement issue. Terrorism is not a military issue. This is the final the context. It's not insurgency, it's terrorism. So therefore, wherever you have seen, whether US and other places, or in UK and West, post 9/11, they have strengthened the basic task forces or counterterrorism centers, or the FBI on Scotland Yard and the New York Police and other organizations. It's the policing setup which has been strengthened. So I'm a strong proponent, and we can deliver if the police is strengthened. But what's happening on the ground is that unfortunately the police stands demoralized because their commanders are not even given security of tenure. There is no trust in the system that the police, which has delivered in Karachi, and wherever given a chance, they have done it. And therefore, we must not only build the public trust in the police organization through building these institutions like public safety commissions and police complaints authorities, but we have to develop the capacity of professionalization of police through specialization, through investigation cadres, and through a system which is based on scientific investigations and not on ocular testimony, as Justice Nasra Iqbal understands this issue, that we have been relying for far too long in making our cases which are based on falsehood. The cases cannot be built on falsehood. They have to be built on circumstantial and scientific evidence. And that is where the recent Supreme Court rulings, I think, are a landmark rulings, where they have now asked the police that they will not tolerate any fake witnesses or ocular testimony based on such kind of cases which come up before the courts of law. So coming back to your one-liner to your the question that you raised is, the writ of the state will be established by strengthening the first line of defense, which are the police services of Pakistan. And that is where the investment or development needs to take place.
जस्टिस नासरा, जब आप जज थी तो आपका क्या तजुर्बा था पुलिस के बारे में? क्योंकि हमने सुना था कि जिस वक्त ये बड़ा टेररिस्ट मलिक इसहाक जज के सामने खड़ा होता था तो जज भी डर जाते थे।
यकीनन सूरत हाल तो ऐसी ही थी, और इस वास्ते जिस बात को भी रेफर हुआ कि कुछ अरसे के लिए मिलिट्री पार्टिसिपेशन कोर्ट्स में की थी, ताकि वो जो एक खौफ था ना वो हट जाए, एंड इट डिड वर्क. एंड I think probably though it was not a very good initiative and has to be taken away gradually, लेकिन उसके बगैर हमारा चारा ही नहीं था. और मैंने तो ये देखा था कि जहां भी कोई आप पुलिस से मदद लेने की कोशिश करें, मसलन मैं तो क्योंकि मेरा औरतों के साथ बहुत होता था ताल्लुक, और किसी वक्त मैं उनको कहती थी अच्छा ये जाके आप देखिए कि पानी वाले तालाब में क्या हो रहा है उस एरिया में where the prostitutes live, because they had been women who had been forced into that kind of oldest profession of the world. The police would inform them before going there, and I would say go now because it's very near the court, and report back to me in an hour. They would tell them by their own radio telephone that we are coming. The place would be empty and it would be locked, and they would come back and report कि जी वहां तो है ही कोई नहीं, जो ये बात है ये सब गलत है. दूसरी बात ये है कि डीएनए का जो है, जिसकी तरफ खोसा साहब ने भी रिफर किया कि ऑक्यूलर एविडेंस हमारी सारी यहाँ पे विटनेसेस थे, स्टॉक विटनेसेस होते थे. It was in subsequently, I think 2005-6, that the court declared, the Supreme Court, that DNA is the most reliable evidence that we can have. And still in our lawmaking legislation, DNA is not included. It is because of the declaration of the courts that evidence which is circumstantial and does not depend just on ocular testimony is now taken into consideration, which is a major step forward, I think. But we really need to work on it more, and the police, of course, needs to be trained in this also. Of course, Mr. Khosa has more experience. He would comment on it.
Oh, thank you very much. Just to add to what you have just said, Justice Nasra, the military courts were, about 14 military courts were established for 4 years. It had a sunset clause, 2 years, extended to another 2 years. They dealt with 650 cases during these 4 years. And 344 accused were awarded death penalties. Out of them, 56 stand executed. But this was for basically the focus was the FATA region, or it was the TTP or the Talibans, who were responsible for this APS tragedy and that attack. So military went in full way against those terrorists who were basically around in that FATA or Pak-Afghan border. So, but overall in the country, I think it was after the military court's 4-year period has elapsed, it is now more important for the government and other stakeholders to now establish criminal justice system and strengthen the anti-terrorism courts, and where a landmark judgment has been given by the Supreme Court, a 7-member bench, where they have restricted the definition of terrorism. Not every kind of case now should end up in anti-terrorism court. Very few cases will go there and will get, there is a day-to-day trial aspect, but the accused are entitled to due process, to a lawyer, and not to confessional statements and the way it was resorted in the military courts. So therefore, there is now another development, which is, Mr. Khalid Ahmed, is very important, is that it's the Supreme Court of Pakistan, which took an initiative and constituted a police reforms committee in May 2018. And this police reforms committee has been very active in 2019. Throughout every month, the Chief Justice would take the meeting. There are 9 retired Inspector Generals of Police who are members of this committee, and all serving IGs of Pakistan are members of this committee. They meet, and the priorities were fixed according to citizens' needs. First and foremost was the complaints against citizens. So therefore, it was the direction of the Supreme Court that in every district of Pakistan, there should be an SP complaints. There should be a mechanism that any case which is not registered in a police station, any misuse of authority, wrong arrest, and all these wrongful or malpractices which exist at the police station level need to be taken care of at the senior level. And that's why, starting from a provincial internal accountability branch down to district levels, this whole mechanism has been put in place since 2019. And the result is there is a reduction in the 30% reduction in writs which go against the police before high courts, or matters which are taken by complainants before justices of peace or session judges. They stood reduced. This was a remarkable development. Another development, as you have talked about DNA and others, is that the Supreme Court directed that the investigative capacity of the police officers must be improved. And for that, they said that there should be district assessment committees in every district who should examine each case which results in acquittal, or any accused which is released on bail. You must examine the reasons and give reasons and identify those stakeholders. So this is where the Supreme Court took the initiative. But my basic grouse is that where is the government? Where is the government which basically, says that police reforms or criminal justice reforms is a high priority? And this government was successful in KP during 2013 to 18 by putting together a very good police system, giving a new police law in 2017, giving autonomy and authority to the police chief in administrative and other matters. And that resulted in some remarkable improvements. And those we expected will be translated and carried out in Punjab since 2018. And that is why my book, Inconvenient Truths, is basically focusing in 2018 and where post this new government which takes over had an agenda for reforms, for police reforms. But what we see is frequent change of IGs and the police reforms agenda taking a back seat, particularly in the province of Punjab. This is heartbreaking, but I still have faith that the Prime Minister, who has this criminal justice reforms agenda as his priority, will turn his attention towards the policing aspects. And therefore, he will hear and listen to what the professionals are saying needs to be done in the context of this reforms agenda. Mr. Khalid Ahmed.
Mr. Khosa, in your book, somebody mentions that Pakistan's normal evolution was prevented by its rivalry to the next door large country of India. And I can recall that 1948, when we first, fought our first war in Kashmir with India, the tribals went. It was not the normal army which went in. And then I think we simply followed that route. And 1998, when the Taliban attacked Mazar-e-Sharif, there was a South Punjab organization called Sipahi-Sahaba who were accompanying them, and they killed 5 Iranian diplomats. Now, this is something that Pakistan did not intend doing, but because it allowed these people to be placed in certain areas. For instance, if we didn't have writ of the state in the tribal areas, then we allowed the South Punjab to become also a vacuum of authority. And of course, then we left Balochistan all on its own, till we have now come after 72 years, 73 years, that Pakistan doesn't have a writ of the state and other people are powerful. And I think the most tragic of all was the fact that the people of the tribal areas, since they were not sustained in their own territory, which was not properly administered, first went to Balochistan, disturbed the population balance there. Then they went to Karachi till Karachi became the largest Pakhtun city in the world. And then they, of course, spread out to the Gulf area. Now, I ask again the question that somebody asked in your book: has this rivalry with India somehow spoiled our normal evolution of the state in Pakistan?
Well, this is a sad history and a saga starting from our independence, and the blatant kind of action what was taken in Kashmir based on that unfair uh, aspect. And I have devoted one chapter in this book to power of hope, where it is important that this issue of Kashmir needs to be handled very maturely and very wisely. And that is where I quote the example of Iqbal Ahmed, the visionary, who had very few friends in the military, but General Musharraf was one of those. And he was basically giving something which General Musharraf was even close to following in terms of Kashmir solution. So when we look at, we became a national security state right since inception or since independence, 1948, 65. These proxies were used as instrument of regional or foreign policy. And those were the compulsions or in our national interest at that time. But what I ask in this book is that why do we suffer from an insecurity complex? We don't have to. Pakistan is the fifth largest country, 220 million. Pakistan has the sixth largest army of the world. Pakistan is the seventh member of the nuclear club. Why do we feel insecure? We don't have to be. We have to be a self-confident nation. We must address our internal fault lines. We should not look at the lens of our security or our landscape from India lens perspective. And we are now looking at a broader perspective of CPAC as a trading corridor, as a development which is waiting to happen. So therefore, in the context of China-Pakistan relationship, in the context of developing scenario, India, I think, it will not be a threat for Pakistan, because in a conventional context, we are very strong enough to defend ourselves. What happened after Pulwama was a befitting reply given to India. And I think that they got the message. So therefore, we need not worry. We have to defend our integrity, territorial, but at the same time, we must focus now on trading. We must focus on economic development. So a larger national security policy needs to be put in place. You will be surprised that Pakistan till date does not have a national security policy. We have an internal security policy, but what good is it if there is no national security policy? We have a national security committee headed by a prime minister, some ministers and others. Cabinet and parliament must approve a broad, all-encompassing, whole-of-the-nation approach where a national security policy is put in place. And it's the human development, and not only a narrow lens of a defense policy or a military context, which is important. So the whole of nation has to go along. We have to build a strong institution. That is why, Mr. Khalid Ahmed, that this book basically presents a 6-point agenda or a 6-point national charter of governance for Pakistan. And the first point is that Pakistan needs to be a trading nation. We must become confident. We must focus on economic development, focus on human development and others. And that is where I think our strength lies, in our manpower, in human. We have the great people. We can be a great success story if we come out of this narrow lens of national security or that kind of thing. The second is, and I hope.
मैं चाहता हूं कि आप बताएं कि आपने सोचा है कि पाकिस्तान का इर्तिका जो हुआ है, जो रियासत पाकिस्तान का, इसमें क्या क्या चीजें जो हैं वो काबिल गौर हैं?
इर्तिका से आपकी क्या मुराद है? 72 साल में क्या हमारा कोई वाज़े इर्तिका हुआ है? یہ تو بہت ساری باتیں جو کھوسا صاحب نے بتائیں کہ 7th نیوکلیئر کلب میں ہم شامل ہو گئے, 6 موسٹ پاپولر اسٹیٹ ہیں, لیکن یہ ہمیں نیگیٹیوٹی کی طرف بھی لے جا سکتے. پاپولرنس سے تو خاص طور پہ ہمارے یہاں جو کچھ چین نے کیا وہ کرنے کا کوئی طریقہ کار بنا ہی نہیں. میں کھوسا صاحب کی باتیں سنی اور یہ کتاب بھی پڑھی, میں یہ سوچ رہی تھی کہ کیوں نہیں ہمارے یہاں ایک لیڈرشپ ٹریننگ پروگرام ہوتا. آپ آج کل لگا کے دیکھیں, خبروں کے لیے میں لگاتی ہوں, لیکن وہاں پہ جو بحث مباحثے ہو رہے ہوتے ہیں نا, ہر ایک دوسرے کے ساتھ دست و قریبا ہو رہے ہیں. گورننس کے آرٹ جو ہے یا دی سائنس آف گورننس ہیز ٹو بی ٹاٹ ٹو دا پیپل ہو کم ٹو آر پارلیمنٹس اینڈ are then responsible for developing policy. تو اس میں کھوسا صاحب جیسے اور ایسے لوگ ہوں جن کو تجربہ ہو, اور ایک لیڈرشپ ٹریننگ پروگرام چلتا رہا سارے سال, اور اس میں جو بھی آئے, پولیس میں آئے, جو آئے سول سروس میں, جو آئے آرمی میں, ان سب کو یکساں ٹرین کیا جائے کہ گورننس کے سکلز ہوتے کیا ہیں, تو تبھی ہمارے لیے ارتقاء جس کی آپ نے بات کی ہے وہ ممکنات میں آتا ہے. اور جو ہمارا یوتھ ہے, 64% پاپولیشن ہمارے یوتھ کی ہے, ان کو اگر ہم اسی پیراڈائم میں رہے کہ جی جو ورثاء ہیں ہمارے پچھلے لیڈرز کے وہی آگے آئیں گے, تو وہ کہاں جائیں گے. میں تو آج کل کیونکہ یونیورسٹی جاتی ہوں, جی سی یونیورسٹی, اینڈ آئی موسٹلی in the class of the MPhils when I'm learning research techniques, I see what brilliant students we have, far more aware and conscious of what's going on, far more wanting to do something, far more responsive to modern ideas. Those are the people we have to depend on. And it's people like Mr. Khosa and yourself who have to start this program and keep it running round the clock. I remember I went with Dr. Javed Iqbal to Vienna, to Austria. They were running leadership training programs and people were coming from worldwide to take part in it. Pakistan se bhi log aaye hue the, baki duniya se. ہم ایسا انیشیٹ کریں, سنیں جارڈن نے بھی کیا ہوا ہے کچھ, لیکن ہمارے یہاں جہاں بہت زیادہ فقدان ہے اس ساری اسکل کا, کچھ نہ کچھ اگر کھوسا صاحب انیشیٹ کریں تو بہت ہی بڑی بات ہو. اور میں نے یہ ابھی ان سے پوچھا تھا, مبارکباد دی تھی کہ یہ ڈائریکٹر ہو گئے ہیں یونائٹڈ نیشنز کے ڈرگس کو پریونٹ کرنے والا جو آرگنائزیشن ہے, لیکن رہتے یہ یہی لاہور میں ہے, تو یہ تو بہت آسانی سے کر سکتے ہیں. ان سے ذرا پوچھیے کیا یہ پاسبل ہے.
مسٹر خالد احمد, آپ نے جو یہ پاکستان کے ارتقاء کی بات کی ہے, آئی تھنک اٹ از لنکڈ ود آور نیشنل پرپز. اور ہر قوم کا, ہر ملک کا ایک نیشنل پرپز ہوتا ہے. It was very clearly delineated and defined by our founding father Jinnah. اور وہ basically it was Pakistan had to be a democratic and enlightened polity based upon principles of social justice. اور ہمارے نیشنل آبجیکٹیوز وہ اسی بیسس پہ پرسو ہم نے پیس کو, پروگرس اور پراسپیرٹی اچیو کرنی تھی. ہم وہ جناح کا جو ویژن اور نیشنل پرپز ہے اس سے ہٹ گئے اور ہم ایک نیشنل سیکیورٹی اسٹیٹ بن گئے. ہم وہ ڈیموکریٹک ایسپریشنز بھول گئے, ہمیں ملٹری رولز آ گئے, ہماری انٹرونشنز ہوئیں, اور ود دا ریزلٹ کہ پاکستان کا بریک اپ جو ہوا ہے اس کے بعد اب پاکستان ایک اٹ از ناؤ ان اے مڈل اسٹیٹ جو بٹوین بھٹو 1973 کانسٹیٹیوشن وچ از اے سوشل کانٹریکٹ, ایک کانسٹیٹیوشن جو ہوتا ہے اس کے, اور جنرل ضیاء کے پیراڈائم میں جو انہوں نے یہ دیا, اس میں پاکستان میں کنفیوژن پاکستان کا شکار. سو ہمارا جو سوشل کانٹریکٹ ہے سوسائٹی اور اسٹیٹ کا, وہ تبھی مضبوط ہو سکتا ہے کہ ہم اپنے فاؤنڈنگ پرنسپلز اور نیشنل پرپز کی طرف واپس لوٹیں, اور وہ صحیح جمہوریت میں ہے, اور ڈیموکریٹک وہ ایسپریشنز not through rigged elections but through a fair transparent process and a good governance paradigm اس کے ذریعے ہے جس میں legitimacy آئے گی. سو پاکستان کی اسٹیٹ کو ہیومنائز کرنا ہے, پاکستانی جو نیشنل سیکیورٹی نیریٹو ہے اس کو بدلنا ہے ہم نے, اور therefore now is an opportunity to now get into a national dialogue between all stakeholders. Let us admit our mistakes made in the past, all the state institutions, whether it's parliament, whether it's executive, whether it's judiciary, and all the other institutions linked, have to sit together and identify कि पाकिस्तान को हमने आगे लेके किस तरह चलना है. तो इस किताब में एक हम्बल एफर्ट की है कि 6 नुकाती प्रोग्राम आपके सामने है, और उसमें सोशल जस्टिस का इशू है, ये हैव और हैव नॉट्स का इशू है. यहाँ पे यहाँ एलीट कैप्चर हो गया है, यहाँ पाकिस्तान इज कैप्चर्ड बाय द एलीट, और ये मुल्क ये आम शहरियों के लिए, गरीबी गुरबा के लिए नहीं रहा. इस मुल्क पर काबिज हो गए हैं ये इस किस्म के जो वेस्टेड इंटरेस्ट है, और वो
मुख्तलिफ बीच में बोलने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ. जिस वक्त हम कहते हैं कि एलीट है, तो इसमें कौन कौन से लोग शामिल हो जाते हैं? मसलन ये कि अगर मैं एक जज से पूछूं कि क्या तुम जिस वक्त अपने दरबार में बैठते हो, कोर्ट में बैठते हो, तो जो एक आलम मदरसे में बैठा हुआ है, आपकी अथॉरिटी और उसकी अथॉरिटी में मुमासलत है कुछ या नहीं है? अगर आपके पास पावर नहीं है और उसके पास पावर भी है, यानी अगर एक पेशावर का, नौशहरे का मदरसे को 9 मिलियन मिल जाता है, फंड मिल जाता है, और पुलिस को नहीं मिलता, तो जो एम्पावरमेंट है वो किसके पास जाएगी? तो मैं ये सोच रहा हूँ कि जिस वक्त आप कहते हैं एलीट, तो उसमें वो लोग भी शामिल करने पड़ेंगे जिनके पास पावर है. ना सिर्फ ये कि उनके पास दौलत है, या ये कि वो नौकरशाही में है, ये भी है कि बाहर भी आप देखें कि आपने मुल्क को छोड़ रखा है, आपकी हुकूमत की रिट जो है वो बहुत नहीं है. फिर है बड़े बड़े शहरों में बड़े बड़े मदरसे भी हमारी एलीट में शामिल हैं, जो कि हमें डिक्टेट भी करते हैं, उनके पास पावर भी है. तो ये सब चीज को सबऑर्डिनेट कैसे हम करेंगे?
I think when I say elites, इसी में वही जो those who wield influence and power and authority, and that includes our sacred cows or holy cows. और उसमें वो military establishment भी है, उसमें judiciary भी है, ये शामिल हैं. उसमें politicians हैं, उसमें civil servants हैं, bureaucracy है. ये सब ये elite इसमें शामिल हैं, जो कि एक power grab के context में इस वक्त involved है. और ये सोशल जस्टिस का इशू, व्हेन आई से इन द मदरसा कॉन्टेक्स्ट में, वो लोग एक नाराज तबका है जो कि पेरिफेरी पे एक फेंक दिया गया है, उसको हमने रिजेक्ट कर दिया है. और वो एम्पावर कहाँ फील करता है? वो एक मिलिटेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ज्वाइन करके, वो एक मदरसा या एक मस्जिद के अंदर उसको अपना वो गुस्सा वो निकालता है इस पे कि सोशल इनजस्टिस है इस माशरे में. So therefore हमें इस पे बहुत जरूर सोच विचार, और हमारी पॉलिसीज जो हैं वो वेलफेयर ओरिएंटेड और सोशल जस्टिस का पर्सपेक्टिव उनको लें. हमें रूल ऑफ लॉ चाहिए.
ये भी एक बात है कि आपको पुलिस को, क्योंकि हम सिविल सोसाइटी की बात कर रहे हैं, तो पुलिस को हमें एम्पावर करना पड़ेगा. लेकिन पुलिस की जब हम उनको सर्विस में लेते हैं, तो वो छोटे छोटे डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स में लेते हैं, और वो ऐसे इलाकों से आए होते हैं जहाँ पर रियासत की ताकत नहीं होती, बल्कि औरों की ताकत होती है, जो कि रियासत के दूसरे काम कर रहे होते हैं, यानी जिहाद वगैरह कर रहे होते हैं. उनके पास पावर ज़्यादा होती है. तो वो जब पुलिस में आते हैं तो मसला पैदा होता है कि क्वालिटी ऑफ पुलिसमैन को कैसे बेहतर किया जाए.
एब्सोल्युटली, ये बहुत क्रूशल सवाल है जी, क्योंकि जिसने 30-35 साल इस महकमे में गुजारने हैं, चाहे वो असिस्टेंट सब इंस्पेक्टर या एक कांस्टेबल आता है या वो हायर रैंक्स पे आता है, तो उसकी रिक्रूटमेंट और वो बहुत ही एक फेयर और ट्रांसपेरेंट तरीके से हो. और इसमें एक अच्छा स्टेप जो लिया गया, वो असिस्टेंट सब इंस्पेक्टर्स और हायर रैंक्स को पब्लिक सर्विस कमीशंस के लिए लिया गया. कांस्टेबल्स पे अभी भी लोकल बोर्ड्स हैं. सो देयरफॉर मैं आपकी बात से इत्तेफाक करता हूं कि हमें ये जो पुलिस की ट्रेनिंग और रिक्रूटमेंट और करियर प्लानिंग है, इसके ऊपर बहुत ज्यादा एम्फेसिस और फोकस करने की जरूरत है, इसमें इन्वेस्ट करने की जरूरत है. और ये मिलिट्री एज एन इंस्टीट्यूशन क्यों स्ट्रांग हो जाती है? क्योंकि वो अपने ट्रेनिंग इंस्टीट्यूशंस पे, अपने इदारे पे बहुत इन्वेस्ट करते हैं. तो हमें जो फर्स्ट लाइन ऑफ डिफेंस पुलिस है, उस पे इन्वेस्ट करेंगे तो आगे सोसाइटी की जो सेटिस्फैक्शन और ट्रस्ट फिर बिल्ड होगा. Therefore, we must realize that police is not a villain, it is a victim of our state policies in terms of resources, in terms of policies and priorities. And therefore, police commanders are not courtiers of politicians. They are not courtiers of rulers. They are servants of the law. They are public servants. और हमें police जो है, it has to recognize its role. So therefore, there's a greater responsibility on the police command कि हम अपनी ये shoulder करें ये responsibility और एहसास दिलाएं तमाम स्टेक होल्डर्स को, चाहे वो पार्लियामेंटेरियंस हैं, सिविल सोसाइटी है या दूसरे इदारे हैं, कि कितनी डेवलपमेंट पुलिस में जरूरी है जो इस मुल्क को आगे लेके चलेगी. सीपैक कामयाब नहीं हो सकता अगर हमारी प्रोग्रेस और पुलिस कामयाब नहीं.
शुक्रिया जस्टिस नासरा. मैं चाहता हूं कि आखिरी कलमात जो हमारी गुफ्तगू हुई है उसके बारे में हमें जरूर अदा फरमाएं.
आप दोनों की मौजूदगी में मैं तो कुछ ही नहीं कह सकती, लेकिन मेरी क्योंकि नौजवानों से हर रोज इंटरेक्शन होती, मैं एक बात जरूर करूंगी. इकबाल ने कहा हुआ है, जवानों को पीरों का उस्ताद कर, खिरद को गुलामी से आजाद कर. आजकल के जो हमारे नौजवान हैं, उनको आप इंसेंटिव दें, उनके लिए अपॉर्चुनिटीज खोलें. जैसे खोसा साहब ने भी कहा, हर जो है रिक्रूटमेंट वो मेरिटोक्रेसी पे होनी चाहिए. लेकिन यहाँ सिफारिश का, और ये इसका कायदे आजम ने हमें मना किया था कि 3 चीजों से आप बेवेयर करें, नेपोटिज्म, जॉबरी एंड करप्शन. और यही तीनों चीजें जो हैं ये हमारे मुआशरे में रैम्पेंट है. जब तक हम कोई ऐसा सिलसिला नहीं बनाएंगे कि ये तीनों चीजें खत्म हो जाएं और हमारे नौजवान आगे आए और जो कुछ उनकी अवेयरनेस है, और मैं देखती हूँ रोज, उनको हम मौके दें, तो इंशाल्लाह हम दुनिया के उन ममालिक में शामिल हो सकते हैं जो सफ़े अव्वल में है और जहां कायदे आज़म ने ये विजन देखा था कि एहतराम इंसानियत होगा, हम इस मुल्क के अंदर करेंगे, और जहां दुनिया में हमारा इंटरेक्शन होगा वहां भी करेंगे.
शुक्रिया, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया सर. थैंक यू.
खालिद अहमद साहब, if I can just मैं to add to Justice Nasra's comments, conclusions, पुलिस के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में जो इन्होंने बात की है, हमारी पुलिस को एक पॉलिटिकल ओनरशिप चाहिए टू डीपोलिटिसाइज, उनको ये एहसास होना चाहिए. सेकेंडली, हाईली अकाउंटेबल, हम इसके लिए इंस्टीट्यूशंस दरकार हैं जो अकाउंटेबल करें. तीसरा, इसकी ऑपरेशनल और एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव ऑटोनॉमी होनी चाहिए. चौथा, इसमें इन्वेस्टिगेटिव और प्रोफेशनलिज्म को बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ाना चाहिए. और अबव ऑल, पुलिस इज ए कम्युनिटी सर्विस. हमें सर्व करना है कम्युनिटी को, और हम एक फोर्स नहीं है, हम एक इंस्ट्रूमेंट ऑफ ऑपरेशन या कोएर्शन नहीं है. अब ये नहीं चल सकता इस तरह.
शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत तारिक साहब. शुक्रिया नासरा साहब.
थैंक यू वेरी मच.